Thanks for joining us again today on Practical Church Planting. We're going to be giving you 5 plans that you need to plant a healthy church.
And before we dive into that really quickly, if you want to plant a healthy church, you should also go to practicalplanting.com/launch to get our Growing Your Launch Team course.
Yes.
We don't want people to waste money on things that are not beneficial to them, but we guarantee if your launch team will at least double, or not, if not double, at least gain at least 10 people.
Mm-hmm.
I would say this: if you're launching less than 2 years out and you've got over 50 people on your launch team, don't waste your money on it. You're clearly killing it.
Yeah.
That's not the case for almost all of us.
Yes.
And so if you need a practical, workable plan of what to actually do, practicalplanting.com/launch. And if you're not finding it helpful, get 100% of your money back. It's $149 because we ain't about wasting money.
That's right.
But you need a plan. And speaking of plans, that's what we're going to talk about this episode.
Here's 5 of them.
The course actually will walk you through some of these, so you can not be like, this is a good idea. What do I do?
Yep.
Here's how you can do it. This was recently, a church planning assessment with Acts 29, which is our network, so I help out with the assessments. And so, these are some things that were freshly stuck out to me as we're, things that we really need to do that could be helpful for all of us. Here's number 1, is fundraising.
Yes.
Have a fundraising plan, and the plan cannot be we're going to ask a couple of churches and just hope it works out. We've got a lot of episodes. I think they change. We have like 4 episodes, like a number 1 episode. They're always like flip-flopping. I don't know I don't know how you have 4 that are doing that.
Yeah.
As of this recording, the number 1 back in the lead is episode 169. Conversation I have with a friend of mine, Jordan Penley, about how to fund. It's fundraising 101. So listen to that. That's a good first step. But you need to have a plan and like an actual workable plan for all of church planning stuff. So how many people do you need to meet with a month? How many conversations do you need to have? What is your church budget goal? And how do you plan to get that? What's your personal support raising goal? Like, how do you plan to get that? It can't just be we need $150,000 and we're just praying that God shows up.
Yeah.
That, especially if you're like, let me do this too. After doing a couple of these church planning assessments and just talking to many of you who've reached out over the years of practical church planning, if you're married and you're planning a church and you have and your wife, and she like wants to support you, but she's very anxious and worried, a lot of that has to do with the fact that her husband, who wants to plant a church, doesn't have a plan.
Yeah.
Like, it's one thing to have faith, and we know, there's going to be a lot of unknowns. But when, the church planter can't say to his wife at the end of the day, here's what I've actually done. I can't control the outcome, but I can control like what I'm actually doing.
Mm-hmm.
So how much money do you need? What is your fundraising goal? And then how are you going to get there? Like, how many contacts do you need to talk to? I mean, listening to that episode kind of breaks this down more.
Yeah.
Like getting a list of like 200 to 300 people that you're going to reach out to and make a certain amount of calls a week. One of the biggest reasons church plants fail is because of lack of money. And one of the what happens to a lot of church planters is fundraising is intimidating. So they don't take it seriously right away. They start to take it seriously because things are getting bad. And so they're no longer worried. And it was too late.
Yep.
Because they've already asked people once and they didn't do a good job. And so you just need to have a plan of not just we want to have this much money, but how am I actually going to do it? And what steps does it look like each month for me to work towards that? Again, you can listen to that episode. But you got to have a plan. You got to have a budget. You got to have a metric of how many people you're talking to try to make that happen.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully this isn't a surprise, but one way I always thought about it is if we were, whether it's like my wife and I were staff, but we raise support. So similar idea. But if whether it's raising support or if you're launching a church, if I was talking to someone who is a lot more well-established, we'll say, in maybe the business world, like maybe someone talking about to like be on a management team to help kind of get this thing started, how comfortable would I be telling them my plan? Because that's like the number one thing they're going to ask, especially in the beginning of how are we going to actually come up with the money to make this thing happen. And if I am sitting there with them like deer in the headlights and no answer, I would never want to do that. And that was that was with support raising as well. As we were asking people, I was asking people who were older than me, who I respected, and if one of them asked, not just I know you're talking to me right now, but what's your plan to come up with this amount of money you need? I didn't want to not have an answer for them. I didn't want it to be like I'm just talking to people like you. Like I wanted to actually say we have a budget, we have a personal budget. This is how much we need to raise. This is how many people. I wanted to have it all laid out so it looked like I'm not just coming to you because I think you're easy, that you're an easy yes, but we actually have a plan. And the same thing goes for churches. You need to have a plan of what you're going to do, because honestly, like Dylan said, if you don't have a plan, it's just, I hate speaking in absolutes when it comes to church because I know that there's room for the Holy Spirit, things can happen, but it is not going to go well if you don't plan financially. And I think that part of the Holy Spirit working is working in preparation, like
Yeah.
working in you creating a budget and you being responsible for these things that you're being entrusted with. And so create a budget. If you don't know how to do these things, this is where listening to that podcast, talking to people who have done it before really comes into play. But there's no, it is vitally important.
Yeah, and you don't need to have like this bulletproof answer 50 questions for people. But if you go to somebody and says, "Here's how much money we're looking to raise.
Mhm.
Here's how much we're looking to get from churches, which is not going to be as much as it used to be. So you got to have a plan. Here's how many people we need to have X amount of people. I mean, we would recommend asking people to give $100 a month for a year or whatever, and say, I need this many people. This part. Here's how many people I'm talking to a week. Here's how many people have said yes. Like,
Yeah.
it just shows that you've actually thought about this, and it also gives you the ability to say whether or not we hit our fundraising goals. I've actually done something this week about it, rather than just hoping that somebody tells me about their friends so I can send them an email
Yeah.
and not actually talk to them.
Yeah.
So again, if you want to plant a healthy church, you've got to have a plan of what you're going to do and be able to work that plan and not just hope that the money comes in.
Yep. That's good.
Number 2, what you're going to do pre-launch. Now, I know we keep talking about this. It's just true. Our course walks you through like what do you do? And how often should you do things? When should you do them? Like, how do you build a calendar that's like not overwhelming? And so I'm not gonna. You're gonna have to go through the course if you want that.
Yeah.
But I'll just say again, the big problem is people just don't know what they're gonna do. They have some arbitrary launch date, maybe. Which again, we're a big fan of picking a launch date, and then working backwards from it. But like, how often are you going to gather together? You listen to our episode, the last one about Disney. We big proponents of Sunday gatherings. Now, if you're far out, it doesn't need to be a worship service, but having a weekly rhythm where people are gathering together. How often do you want to do? Do you want to serve the community, or do you want to do, just some hangout times? Just assuming I'm going to start like a Sunday service, people are going to show up. That's not really how it works. And so, what's your plan? Like, what's your church calendar until leading you up to the launch date? And if you don't really have one, or if you're doing it like week by week, that's not. I would recommend doing it if you haven't launched yet. And if you have launched yet, it's good to work through a church calendar, like to be 6 months to a year ahead. Things can change as you get closer, but at least to say, here's what we're doing. But if you haven't launched yet, what's your plan for the next 6, 12 months, 9 months, or whatever? You can tweak it as things get closer, but that way you actually know what you're working towards and not just guessing every week.
Yeah, we've been a part of a church plant before, New City, that didn't end up working out, but it was very frustrating in the pre-launch phase to not know what we were doing.
Yeah.
We were like, unpaid, volunteer staff, I should say, not unpaid, but we were volunteer staff, and so we were like part of like the leadership, like we were trying to help do this thing, and it seemed like very often things were changing. We're gonna do Bible studies, and then people weren't really coming to them, so we didn't stop them. And then we're going to do like these serve things. It was a lot of just like, we'll try this, and then we'll try this, which I get at there are points where you just try things and they don't work.
Yep.
But it was very frustrating to not know really what we were doing, because it was hard to talk to people about. Like, it was hard to talk to people about, come join our church plant, come join this launch team. And then people ask, what does that mean? And it's hard to not have an answer. Like, we're going to plant at this time, but until then, are we meeting? We sometimes weren't even really sure. And so I can tell you that if you don't have a solid plan of what you're doing, your people for sure don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And so even if you just have like this rough idea in your head, communicate it and make it a solid plan, and it'll help people be able to invite and to know what they're actually working towards, than to just think like we're just going to be kind of doing things until launch.
Yeah. Yeah. So having a plan that you can work towards. It's okay if things don't work out, but at least you know what you're doing and what you're trying to do. And then, of course, you want to communicate this in our Practical Church Planning group on Facebook. Someone recently asked, like, how do you tell people about the stuff that you're doing? And my advice was, there's not like a one way to do it. And so you can recommend, if you gather weekly, here's some things coming up. I would recommend, I know a lot of church planners may not do this, especially in the pre-launch page, a weekly newsletter, whatever you want to call it. Plain text, very basic. If you haven't launched yet, maybe a couple of sentences of something you're celebrating or excited about, or some vision, and then some things that are coming up. Just letting people know, like, here's the schedule, here's the calendar, but keeping that in front of people, trying different ways. If you have a church text group thing, you want to do that, trying different ways to keep it in front of people, but actually having a plan, people know when things are. Consistency is great. So the more consistent things can be, so, if there's a weekly thing, if there's a bi-weekly thing, the same like time, ideally the same location. I mean, some things are a little bit different, but just having a plan. And if I were to say to you haven't launched yet, what's your pre-launch plan for the next 6 months, it can't just be Bible study once a week.
Yeah.
Like that's not, people aren't going to join. Like it's not going to grow into anything. If you want, if you don't, I mean, if you want it to grow, if you don't want it to grow, that's fine. But if you do,
Yeah.
just you've got to have a plan. What are you going to do pre-launch? Again, this was like an infomercial for our launch team course, but I just think it's good.
Yeah, it is.
And so, if you're like, I need to do that, get the course, and you can get a workable plan.
Yep.
Number 3, this is the one that everybody likes to talk about, and then people don't really do. So let me answer that. What I mean by that. I'm talking about. This is your discipleship plan, or your partnership plan, or your membership plan. Here's the thing: we love to talk about discipleship
pipelines,
and I think part of it too is the same way discipleship can also be like this weird, scary word, where like people have to, I don't know, like compete with like who's making better disciples. And so what happens is you get around pastors and they talk about their discipleship and it's like really intense and awesome, and like 3 people in their church are doing it.
Yeah.
And so I would recommend this to you. And our approach is different, so whatever your conviction, like we don't have a big process. We don't have like for us, for example, a big discipleship process. So if you want to create one, that's fine. You just have to. If nobody's doing it, it's not creating disciples. Even if on paper it sounds awesome. So like here's what I mean for us. I think one of the basic ways in the beginning to create a discipleship process, and don't feel like it's okay if this is unimpressive. Like I don't care. I've gotten to the place now. Again, I'm an Enneagram 8, so that's part of it. And New City is 4 years old, and like we're not like a struggling church plant, so it's also like I don't have that pressure on me. But like people talk about how long they preach. And we're Acts 29, Reform, whatever. So people like preach forever, and I say 30 to 35 minutes, and I don't feel bad. Like I just, whatever. So the discipleship thing can be the same thing. So here's us. If you're New City, if you're a partner at New Cities or our membership process, we ask you to do a couple of things. We ask you to consistently come on a Sunday morning, which, that's not necessarily measurable per se, but 3 things are measurable. You have to serve in some capacity, you have to give consistently in some capacity, and you have to be part of a community group. Now, of course, there are exceptions to like the group, if like season of life or whatever,
right.
But these are things that we actually measure, and our belief that if you're in a group, if you're giving, and if you're serving, you are likely... That means you're consistently involved in the life of the church. It probably means you're coming on Sundays too if you're doing those things. You are likely growing in your faith with Jesus. So when people ask me what are our discipleship plan, that's our discipleship plan. Now it doesn't sound fancy and awesome, and there aren't like, it's not to say there can't be side things like maybe you meet with a couple guys once a week, or you have like this biblical introduction class that a couple people go through. Those things are fine, but like generally speaking, you should be able to people need to know what you're asking them to do, and then you need to have a way of measuring, is that actually happening? And so what is your discipleship plan? So discipleship, again, can sound like a very fancy, intimidating word, but what are you asking your people to do, and do you have a way of tracking that? Because if the answer is you're not really sure and you can't track it, then you don't know if you're doing what you want to do. I mean, there's no way to know.
Yeah, that's good. I appreciate that you're talking about making it simple, because I can't tell you how many times I've heard of like church planners creating their discipleship process, and it's just like it is like it's like a badge of honor the more convoluted
and
it gets.
Sounds great, and then does. 2 people actually do it.
Yeah, and it's like even listening to it, it's like that's a lot to structure. Not that it's a bad thing if you're pulling it off well, but like it's the more convoluted it gets. I'm not saying it has to be like stupidly simple. You can, whatever your conviction is, but the more that you keep trying to like throw into it, just the harder it is to pull off. I'll just put it that way. Not to say it's impossible, but go with your conviction. But doing things like making sure people are in community groups, making sure that we're building up and launching new community groups, new community group leaders. Like this is a very measurable way, very measurable way to disciple people. And it's not, and it's very easy to explain. And to other pastors or to other like people in network, it may seem like that's all you're doing.
Yeah.
But to our people, when you're talking to them, it's very easy for them to know what they need, what they should be doing, and what it looks like to be discipled at New City. You know, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm far more concerned about the people that are going through it than about what someone else thinks about our process. You know what I mean? And so I think making, figure out what works for you, but making sure that at least you can communicate it well. If you feel like you have to have this big process, make sure you can communicate it well and make sure you can do it well.
Yeah.
and that it's actually something that you can do practically and not just look at on
Yeah, and
paper.
it's okay. People don't have to live at the church, and it's okay to also do extra things that are a little bit, I don't know, for lack of a better word, more intense.
Hmm.
Like if you want to have a small group of guys, for example, that you're walking through this like a discipleship book with, that's fine. But you also just need to have like, generally speaking, what are we calling people to do, and how do we know if they're doing that?
Hmm.
And so your discipleship plan, maybe our hope is to make it maybe more not as intense or sorry, not as like hard to grasp.
Yeah.
Like what are you asking your people to do? And some of those things have to be measurable so that you can know if you're doing it.
Hmm.
Like we count attendance. We don't like have people check in. So that's like hard to count necessarily. I mean, we can eyeball it, but like we track community group attendance. Like
Yep.
we actually track attendance. You have to, the group leaders every week have to say who's been there. Obviously we look at giving. Pastors do this differently. As a lead pastor, I look at giving.
Hmm.
Like, if I want to look at something up, I can see what everybody gives because that's a discipleship metric. It's helpful for me to know.
Yeah.
And if you're in a group, or sorry, and if you're serving, and
Yep.
we don't have people serve every week, so it's like serving is not really hard at New City. Like we set the bar pretty low, but we just think if you're involved, then you're growing. And so we would encourage you to have a discipleship plan. And it's okay if it doesn't sound super complicated, but it just needs to be something that people know what their expectations are, and you have a way of measuring if that's actually happening.
Yeah. It's good.
So, discipleship plan. Number 4, an online engagement plan strategy.
Uh-oh.
Now, we're all for this, like social media, videos, all the stuff online, but are you like, this is so much easier to do than I think a lot of people think.
Yeah.
So much
Yeah.
easier to do. Now, you might not have all the fancy equipment and videos, but like there's a lot of resources. Again, we talk about this in the course. Also, we've just changed our email. So, practicalplanning.com, we will send you the Church Planner's Guide to Social Media.
Hmm.
And we spent money on time on this thing.
Yeah, it's good. It's good.
And it'll
Cost you an email address.
it'll cost you just so we can send it to you. But it will actually walk you through some of the things that we do and some of the things that you do, so you can actually create like a social media plan. So it's Church Planner's Guide to Social Media. You can get it at practicalplanting.com. But what you do, there's, for example, so there's like a lot of resources out there. Like Sunday Social is something that we're using right now. It's like $15 a month maybe, and there's other ones. And so will they like give you graphics
Yep.
to post? And so we create some of our own stuff, and then we couple it with that. So we have we post on, I mean, as of this recording, like Facebook and Instagram. Those are the biggest ones that we're on. We post pretty much once a day on both of those platforms, pretty much every day. And but you need to have a plan, and it doesn't take a lot of time. I mean, you could do this. Like for me, I'm the one that does our social media. It takes me an hour a week. Now we do videos, and so like that takes longer. It has to be edited and whatever. But like in terms of planning, I use, you can use whatever you want, and I do a week at a time. It takes me an hour to say, here's what we're posting at what time. It's not a lot of work. It gets quicker the more you do it.
Yeah.
But like, you need to be planning, you need to be posting consistently on the places that people are at. Whatever you want to do, but it has to be something. And so what is your plan? It can't just be whenever we have an event or listen to this online Bible study or my live stream. Like it can't just be service stuff.
Yeah.
Having a way to actually engage people. I would encourage you to, or I would remind you that this is a long game. So some people get into this and then they don't get like 50 likes on each post, and then they just kind of stop.
Yeah.
But people, just because they don't like it doesn't mean they don't see it. People don't see everything. And most people, before they come to your church, are probably looking you up online. Facebook and Instagram are the biggest ones for us. I mean, we have a Twitter account. We post maybe a couple times a week, maybe, but it's like whatever. Like hardly anyone's on there. I mean, I'm on there, but a lot of people aren't on there anymore. But like if I were to go to your church, I would check your website. I would also check your Facebook and or Instagram. And if I see one post a week about listening to our service, it just is like, do you not realize that people are here? And so what's your plan to engage people online?
Yeah, create a plan and then make sure it's executed. And make sure that whoever is, whether you're a one-man show or if you've got some people helping out, maybe volunteer-wise, make sure they know the plan as well. Like there's a time I worked for another company and kind of ran their social media. Not like that was my official position, but that was just kind of one of the things because theirs was bad and I just had the bandwidth to do it. And so it was fine. But then other people who had access would also just like throw things in there and post, things that they thought as well. And so like some of them, I mean, by no means this is not my strong suit. Dylan is much more, this is what you do at New City. So this is not
and I would even say I'm not even the best at it.
Well,
I just have a try to do it.
Yeah, we've got tools that work.
Yeah.
But like it was not my strong suit, but I was doing fine. It was fine. But then other people would just write a bunch of like just like plain text things, and posts. And it was long story short, it's very clear that there wasn't a plan, and there wasn't a plan that everyone knew. It
Yeah.
was different people had their own plans, and so it was just kind of a mess. And so, not saying that's the same thing that's going to happen in your
Yeah.
scenario, but make sure that there's a plan of what's going to get posted when, and then that way, if you create it now, if you are a one-man show, if you bring someone in to help, whether it's staff or volunteer-wise, you can show them. You're not just kind of handing them the logins and saying, please fix this for me, or please make this good. But you can say, I have a plan, and maybe they're better at this, and you can say, review it, and maybe if you have better ideas, we can make some changes. But that way, you're not just handing something blank and saying, please fix this for me, because to me that shows that you're not even trying, because this is not a hard thing, and not a hard thing, and that's coming from someone who is, I don't even have an Instagram anymore. Like it's just not my thing. But there's so many tools that you can use that take all the thinking out of it for you.
Yeah. So, and you'll get better as you do it. So just try. You don't have to post every day like we do, because you might not, such event launch it, you're not sure what to do. But there's lots of things you can do. I mean, we're doing this thing right now. We do things, I feel like, in seasons, they come and go. But one of the things we do right now is Bible in a minute. So explain a verse in like 75 seconds or less, and so people watch those things, and So all that to say, what are you going to do? Have a plan. If you're like, I don't know anything about social media, practicalplanning.com, and we'll send you the Church Planner's Guide to Social Media. It's really helpful, and it's free.
And
so.
I was gonna say, this is free, so
I
mean, there's no reason not to jump on it. But this is definitely an area where, if you know nothing about this, or if you're not comfortable doing it on your own, spend a little bit of money. And when I say a little bit, there are resources that are legitimately a little bit of money. Like it is not an expensive thing, and it can completely change your online presence for just like a very little bit of money.
And again, but all of our staff when we launched New City Church came from social media.
Yeah,
Brian and Brittany found us on Facebook. Adam, who was our first church planner, found us on Twitter. Like, I'm not saying that's your story, but like most churches, especially if they're pre-launch, aren't active. And so if you are active, that gives you a really big leg up, because people, for people to connect with you.
No, legitimately. I mean, I've shared this before, but the reason that we reached out to New City, we were looking for a church plant, is because they were the only church plant we could find in our city that I could tell from their social media presence that they hadn't shut down. That was it. Like, after I found them, went to their website, and everyone's beliefs say the same things. Like, I'm sure our beliefs lined up, but that's not that hard to do. But like, literally, I was finding church plants where I was unclear. They hadn't posted in a long time, and they're not meeting every week, so it's hard to tell. But like, I couldn't tell, are you still a thing? Because obviously church plants come and go and don't end up planting. But literally, the reason that we sent them a message and said we'd like to meet is because they're the only church plant we could find that it was clear that they hadn't shut down yet. That was it.
There you go. It's a low bar. Just post something. So that was number 4. And then number 5, this is also, I think, more important than I think we realized in the beginning. And that is having a structured calendar plan for your personal calendar. So what happens is again, it's ministry, so everyone says they're busy, which...
So busy.
Get out of here with that word. We spend time on the things that are important to us, and we plan our time accordingly. Now, it's hard because in a digital social media age, which a lot of planters now grew up with that, we're just not good at focusing. And so, I've talked about this. One of my favorite books is Deep Work by Cal Newport. I mean, some of this stuff doesn't perfectly translate to ministry because it's not a ministry, but he talks about how to focus, and it's changed a lot of stuff for me. But like, when are you going to work on sermon prep? I mean, if you're preaching regularly, we were a fan of getting ahead, like blocking out that time or any creative time. Like, your calendar should not be open for everybody all the time. I don't care how big or small your church. Typically, this is a problem with smaller churches because people aren't, pastors maybe haven't learned to deal with their time well. But like, you shouldn't be. I don't know, 60 to 70 hour weeks. I just don't understand how that's a thing. Like, so sometimes in church plants, I'm like, what are you doing? I don't work that much. I don't know. I mean, granted, we have a staff, and so.
But still.
But like, so I would tell you, find things like you should have a consistent weekly rhythm that you follow so that you know when things are coming up. Now, for me, it's different and it's changed over time. And I get, work schedules, and from the beginning, we've had Brian, Brittany, we've had people that have a lot, but still, like for me, how it works right now is Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday from noon till the afternoon, and then Friday afternoon sometimes. That is when I meet with people. That's it. I don't meet people in the morning. I don't do anything. Now, and then sometimes Christine and I will have people over for dinner too. But like, in terms of like, if you want to meet with me, That's it. And what happened over time is it has allowed me to be very focused and productive because I know when I'm working on what. I schedule my calendar ahead of time. We have episodes on this as well. So like at the end of the day, like I've got weekly stuff that's on my calendar before I leave, into my workday. Part of my shutdown routine is like filling up my calendar for the next day. So I know I'm doing what, when. It helps me avoid getting on social media and checking email all the time. We got an episode on Inbox Zero and how I do that. But just having a structured plan of here's how I'm spending my time and telling people when you're available, when you're not. People actually will respect that. They'll actually realize you actually have stuff to do. Most emergencies are not. I mean, if there's an emergency, yes, but most people can wait a couple days or a day and be totally fine with it. I think church planners feel bad because we feel like our schedule has to be open, but then we can't actually do anything and we're busy all the time. And so have a structured time of how you're going to spend your weekly calendar. Things can pop up, but being busy is not a thing. Like if you would say I'm very busy and I would say, okay, show me your calendar, and your calendar, this is just a personal thing, and your calendar doesn't have a lot of stuff on it, I would tell you you're not busy. Now you might say, well, I don't put a lot of stuff in my calendar. Well, then I would say, how do you know that you're busy?
Yeah.
It's the same thing with a financial budget.
Yeah.
People are like, I don't have money, but they don't have a budget, so they don't know. It's work. I get it. But part of this goes back to, I feel like I'm rambling here, part of this goes back to the church. A lot of this goes back to the church that you want to lead.
Yeah.
And if you don't want to lead a house church, and there's nothing, I'm pro house church. I don't care what you're doing. You got to create systems and structures to allow you to be healthy in the church that you want. Most people, I think, would say, yeah, I'd love to have 100, 150 people. Well, to have 150 people means that you got to know when you're doing summer prep, when you're doing development, when you're studying, like when you're doing your own stuff and when you're meeting with people. It needs to be consistent. And so create a plan, and it'll take you some time to like really fine tune it, but it can't just be open for whatever comes up. You got to put on your calendar when you're working on what.
Yeah, and this will help you not just it'll give you permission to kind of say no to things or like not right now, but it'll also just help you in your own productivity of the things you have to do. Like I find for myself, if I don't specifically, this helps the most for me with sermon prep, because I'll find if I don't have a defined end time, I'll get just down some rabbit hole that I'm never going to cover in this message, but just something led to something, and I'm down it, and it's just interesting to read. And then all of a sudden, half the day's gone, and I'm like, I barely even worked on this message. But like, if I had a defined end time, then even if I was down this rabbit hole and not really being productive, I'd at least have an end time and can move to something else. But if I'm doing this and just kind of, reading or learning or whatever, and then I look back and realize, man, I really did not make it as far as I wanted to in this message, then I feel like I got to keep working on it because I don't have much to show for my time, And so this really helps you give a defined start and end time to where you can give yourself permission in that time to do whatever's needed, but then when it ends and it's time to start something else. And so you're not just, your day doesn't just get wrapped up in a certain task. And like this has happened to me with like I do a video editing, and so sometimes things go very smoothly in editing. Sometimes they really don't, and it ends up taking way longer than I planned. But as long as there's not like a deadline is tomorrow, as long as like I have some time, I can still give myself I'm going to end at this time, and I'll pick it up tomorrow. And even if I didn't get as far as I wanted to get, at least I'll be able to get other things done in my day and not just have my entire day wrapped up around this one thing, to where then I go home and it's like I did one thing today. And it's very demoralizing to do one thing in a day or to feel like you did that.
This was really helpful for me when I started doing this. I don't know how long ago, maybe 18 months ago. I started getting more serious 2 years ago, to be able to say, I don't really have a lot to show for what I did, but I can look at my calendar and see that I did stuff. And having a start and end time is helpful because then it gives you the excuse to be like, I'm not done with this right now, but I'm going to move on to something else. Like you're saying, I schedule like summer prep time of when I'm going to do it and when I'm going to be done. Like I have hard stop times, and it might sound unspiritual, but guess what happens? Like on Wednesday, from about 8:30 to 12. That is all I'm doing, and then I'm done with it. Now, again, I'm not done completely. We've got other episodes on like our process and all that sort of thing. But like my main study and sermon time is on Wednesday morning for 3.5 hours, and then we've been doing it every week, whatever. But like having hard deadlines, it just makes you more productive. And so, busyness is not a thing. It should not be a thing, and it's like a Jesus juke. But John Mark Comer's book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, is really good about this, and he just talks about. You can't look at the life of Jesus and say he was busy. And if Jesus wasn't busy, you and I ain't busy. Or if we are, it ain't because of Jesus. It's because of something else. So having a structured calendar plan. Again, we talk about this a little bit in the course. One of the things that I start doing like 2 months ago now, which I should have done years ago, was I started using Calendly with the free version. The paid version would be nice, but it's whatever, not a big of a deal. Because the free version, you only get one calendar and whatever, it doesn't matter. But what I do now, I felt bad 2 months ago. Now I feel excellent. Because when people ask to meet or I offer to meet with somebody, the back and forth, whatever. So I would always offer 3 times just to, and people always typically pick one of the times you offer.
Yeah.
But it's still like kind of annoying to have to think. So I started using Calendly, and it syncs with your calendar. So if you have something going on, like you have available times, and like if something's taken, then it comes off Calendly. And so all I do now is someone reaches out to me or I reach out to them. I felt weird being a small church, but I asked the people before I'd used it, and nobody cares.
Yeah.
In fact, I met, some people who are like, this other pastor who wanted to meet with me, pastor of a large church in the area a couple weeks ago, and I felt awkward because he like reached out to me, and I was like, "Here's my calendar."
Yeah.
Because like he's way busier than I am.
Sure, yeah.
But like I wasn't gonna go back and forth a million times,
Yeah.
and so I would just use that Calendly. It's free. You can set when you're available, and that way just say so. It was so nice. I tried this thing. I emailed 3 people on a Sunday afternoon. I was like, let's just see how it goes, and they all picked a time. There was no back and forth, nothing. It was magnificent. So that might be an easy thing for you.
It's a lot more normal now than if you never use it than you think. Like I've had multiple people give me that exact same response, whether it's pastors or other people. It's if you feel weird about it, don't.
Yeah.
Like it's helpful.
Yeah, I read Cal Newport also came out with a book. The Deep Work was the first one, but the someone he's like a world without email.
World without email, yeah.
And he said, I actually like started using Calendly like the day before I read this chapter. He's like, if you meet with more than 2 people a week, you should use a service like this. So you may not feel like you're big enough or something like that, but if you're meeting with 2 people a week, it's just easy. So honestly, have a structured plan of how you're going to spend your time. If you're busy, does your calendar say you're busy? I would just encourage you to start using your calendar more, and then still see if you feel as busy as you thought you did.
Yes.
And we talked about these other episodes, cutting back on how often you check social media, cutting way back on how often you check your email, taking email off your phone, like stuff like that can be really helpful as well.
Yep.
So those are 5 plans you need to plant a healthy church. Again, practicalplanting.com/launch. You can get the Growing Your Launch Team course, and you can also get the social media church planner's guide to social media. We just walk you through what you can post, when you can post, resources that we use, things that we have tried. If you're like, I don't know where to start, just do whatever we did and then tweak it for you.
Yep.
We don't care about, if it works, it works. If it doesn't, do whatever you need to do.
Yes.
So that's it for this episode. Thanks for being with us. We'll be with you next time on Practical Church Planting.